So it's time to put your portfolio together. Well, your biggest problem right now is probably content. How are you going to fill this document up? What do you have to show? Secondary to that is, what is this thing going to look like? What is this document going to look like? That's what I'm going to try and help you with in this video. Or we're going to build a simple model for a portfolio. It's fairly traditional. Sometimes that's not the worst thing when you're looking for a job. We're going to base this document on the grid. The grid is the most traditional and most versatile organizing principle when you're laying out pages. The fact that this is a portfolio is secondary to the fact that it's a document and it needs to be organized, needs to have some sort of logic to it. And the grid is still the go-to way to set up a page. The man who most influenced me in my approach to grids is Joseph Mueller-Brockman. And he has this amazing book called Raster Systems, where it's page after page of just really interesting variations on grids. And I'll page through this sometimes to get some ideas, but more often than not, I end up going with a simple grid or a simple 2-column or 3-column layout. But it's still good to have these references to sort of keep you visually awake. Another thing you can do is look at books or reports that you like the look of and analyze why the pages work and why you like them. This spread here is from Designing Better Maps by Cynthia Brewer, a name that hopefully you're a little bit familiar with now. And there's a lot to like about the page. It's a simple column layout, a nice use of white space, and you could do a lot worse than designing pages that have this feel. It's kind of a fun thing to do, laying out pages, and you can look to unorthodox sources for inspiration, even if you're not going to use them one-to-one. Everything you look at informs your sensibility. So here's an interesting spread, cover and spread from a strange book by David Byrne. This is called Your Action World. This came out some years ago. It's pages of just cryptic pictures with no description, but interesting layouts and interesting use of color. Of course, you don't have to use a grid, but again, with your portfolio, especially if this is the first time you're looking for a job, a lot of times it's a question of avoiding missteps rather than doing something that's going to be groundbreakingly original. Okay, so let's get down to business and design the book. So my thought on this is that it's going to be primarily a PDF, primarily something that's going to be viewed electronically, maybe attached to an email, maybe uploaded through an electronic job application site, something along those lines. And so with that in mind, I'm going to work with an aspect ratio that's appropriate to the screen. And it will actually, if you decide to have this printed in hard copy, it will actually make a nice printed book. And also it's economical because the finished size is 9 by 8 inches. It has this sort of appealing, almost square shape. And if you double that up, 16:9, which is a good screen aspect ratio, a 16:9 page will still fit nicely on a tabloid piece of paper, 11 by 17. So if you wanted to get this printed up, you could do it quite affordably. Unlike when you're working at 8.5 by 11 and you double that up, you need to print on an oversized page a lot of times, especially if you want to use full bleed. Anyway, different thing. So our design here is based on a simple 2-column grid, about as straightforward as it can get. I like straightforward designs for this kind of document because it doesn't get in the way of your work. The design of the booklet should be transparent to some extent. We'll look through the booklet design and hopefully your work shines through that. We should be focusing on the work, not on some innovative layout. So this is a fairly neutral, sort of modernist, at this point, a traditional layout. 2-column grid, I expect to have more images than text. So the columns are asymmetrical. They're different widths. I'm going to have larger photos, less text always. And you can just mirror this page and I get the same thing on the right hand side as the left hand side, on the recto as on the verso page. Then I'm just going to refine this idea a little bit, and I don't want to have an endless number of pages, so I'm going to start off with a 4-module to a spread type of concept as shown here. So very simple, 2 columns, about as basic and straightforward as a grid layout can get, and then I'm just subdividing that to have 4 sections on each page or thereabouts. And now the fact that I lay out these pages like this doesn't mean that when I get down to the process of populating this document with my work, I have to strictly adhere to it every time. You can diverge from the grid, but the very fact that it's underlying how you place these larger or more strangely shaped documents is what gives cohesiveness to the overall document. So let's spin up InDesign, and I'll demonstrate how easy it is to use this template. Okay, so here's the InDesign doc that we're going to use to produce our PDF. And at first glance, it looks very confusing, and there's lots of stuff going on, and there is. So you really will need to know a little something of InDesign to do this, but really not much. It is kind of a drag and drop tool. But let's do this. Let's turn everything off, and I'll talk you through it layer by layer, and it'll start to make a lot more sense. First of all, as I zoom out, we can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 pages for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 spreads. Actually, I wouldn't count the cover and back cover as spreads, but these, when you see the 2 pages next to each other, that's a proper spread. I'll zoom back in and we'll look at the layers one by one. First, let's look at the basic body pages. Going from top to bottom, I have my grid. And here you can see the 2 columns laid out, and I've got it divided into 4 areas. The thought being I can show, depending on what your work is, 4 different projects, or 4 phases of one project, or 2 and 2, or whatever it is that you're trying to communicate. Going down the layer list, we have a chapter heading. And this is actual text that's on every page, okay? The idea here is that I don't know where the chapters are going to fall, and it's easier to select something and delete it if you don't need it than it is to have to put it in from scratch if you do need it. So every page is set up potentially as a chapter page, and if you don't need it, just delete it. You won't need most of them, so you can just delete most of them. I'm going to turn that one off so we don't get distracted by the overstrikes. Then I have the text body, and this is where you'll actually type in what it is you want to say about whatever photo or image you're talking about. And this is straight up text, editable text. It's not in a master page or anything like that. It's ready to go, and you can just edit it. And again, if you don't need it, you can delete it. One of the concepts here is I was trying to come up with something that would be easy to use for beginning or even intermediate users that want to put something together quickly. It's always easier to delete something than it is to create it. So the pages are all populated the same way. Again, these are the body pages, the guts of the portfolio. And if you don't need it, just delete it. Save a clean copy of this before you go deleting stuff. You might want to get it back. So that's the text body. I'll leave that on actually. And there's a rule. A rule is a fancy word for a line. I just have a line to sort of demarcate the bottom of the page. Then I also have your contact info. And I've got this at the bottom of every page. That's how I would do it. You might find that you feel that's overkill, but that's what I would do if I was sending out an electronic portfolio. You never know when someone's going to take a page cut from it or something. Who knows? Better to have your name on there. This is about you, so have your name on there plainly and in multiple locations. Then I've got page numbers. These are automatic page numbers set up, so if you add pages or remove pages, they'll adjust. Then we have the UIC logo. That's on its own layer. That's only on the back page. So if you're not feeling it, you can turn that off as well. But why not? I assume most of this is going to be student work, so it's appropriate to have the student bug on there somewhere. And I'm going to skip that for now, and then I have a photo layer. And again, photos is you would drop into these other areas here. Slightly different from these body pages is the cover page, where it's based on the same asymmetrical 2-column layout. And you could just go in there. This is real live text, and you can just populate what you want to say. I would just go ahead and type in your name. What's my name? JW Planner. And whatever my work is, student work 2018. Lots of ways you could sort of present this. All the text on here is the same font, and that's Arial. It's hard to make a document that's going to work for every machine. Given the situation these days, you're not going to probably be on a lab computer, but fonts are an issue on different computers. So I figure everybody has Arial, and also I'll package that with the files, another copy of the Arial typeface, just in case you don't have it. So this text is all editable. All you need to do is, if you're a brand new InDesign user, double click in the text box, and you can edit the text. I'm going to just Control Z to undo that, get it back to its state. So we're looking at a combination of things here. We're looking at some things that are on the page, but we're seeing some of these placeholders, like these X boxes. What are those properly called? Rectangle frames. And this is meant to be a placeholder for where you would put your images. And those are actually set up in what's called master pages. And this is where I'm going to lose the new InDesign users, and more experienced InDesign users already understand what's about to go on here. And I've got different master pages applied to my layout. If I look at the Pages tab here, I can see that I've got several different master pages. It's a little bit of an overkill, but I made a master page for this front, and I made a master page for the back. And then I've got three different body master pages. So there's one. Let me double click on the master page area, and we'll look at it. So here's the cover master page, right? This is where it's actually set up, where those rectangle frames exist. Here's a body where you might have the heading of a chapter. I'm thinking that if you want to introduce a chapter, and a chapter would be maybe a project name, or a year, however you're going to subdivide your work. It can be whatever you want it to be, or maybe you don't find it useful at all. And here's the basic body page, where we can see we have the 2-column grid. This has everything on it. It's got your contact info, it's got the page numbers, and it's got the rectangle frames of content areas. Here's a master page where I don't have a page number on the left. This is based on the original body master page, but I just don't have a page number or contact information on it. It's a little bit leaner. Maybe that comes in useful at the beginning or at the end. Who knows? So there's some flexibility here, but for the most part, I think you can go right into the document. I'm back in the regular pages now, and it's a little bit drag and drop. So let's just look at how this might work. Before I do anything, I want to be cognizant of what layer I'm working on. It's very important that you keep your layers straight when you're working on a complex document. And this document has the potential to become kind of complex. So let's drag a few photos in and see how that works. So I'm just going to select the photos layer to make it current. Can't see it because it's on my other monitor, but I've opened some images, and I'm just going to drag and drop them in, and you see I have it on my cursor. So let's say I'm making a spread about a project, and I've got 4 images. I want to have 4 pictures in these 4 sort of frames, these 4 content areas. And it takes a little bit of getting used to how InDesign handles photos. So you can see I've got it on my cursor. When I dragged it in, it's still on my cursor. I haven't picked anything, so it's on my cursor. If I just pick a point anywhere, it comes in full size. That's the actual size of this photo. I'm going to Control Z to undo that. I can also click and drag a rectangle. I'm holding down the left button as I drag, and this is maintaining the aspect ratio of the photo. So I can't warp it, but I can adjust the size of it. Say I needed it really small. As I'm bringing it in, I can adjust the size of it. Control Z again, and it goes back on my cursor. Another thing you can do is drag it right into this frame. Any closed shape and rectangle frames becomes a placeholder for the image. So I don't know if you can see the difference. Like if you, I don't know why it's flickering, but if you see the image on my cursor right now, as opposed to when I'm hovering over a rectangle frame, when I hover over a rectangle frame, it's got those parentheses around the image icon. It's pretty subtle, but the upshot is that it places it within that frame. Okay, so what just happened? It placed it in that frame, but at full size. And what we're not seeing is that it clipped everything that was larger than this actual frame. And the thing about InDesign is that every time you place a photo, it actually comes in with its own clipping mask. This is confusing at first, but it's actually really useful. But to understand how to work with it, you probably need to understand a little more about what a clipping mask actually is. And so rather than explain it here, it's a little easier to explain in Illustrator. Okay, so here I am in Illustrator. I'm going to go ahead and drag in that same image. Came in really huge. That's okay. I'm just going to resize it so it's centered on my artboard. So what a clipping mask is a relationship. It's really useful because our pictures are hardly ever perfect. They're hardly ever perfectly framed. I'm going to go ahead and rename these layers so we can keep track of what just happened. This one came in. This is my photo. And then I'm going to create a frame. Just to check, that's on my photo layer. I'm going to make my frame current. I'm going to draw a rectangular frame, but any shape will work. Doesn't matter what the shape is. It could be a circle, an ellipse, a closed amorphous shape. It doesn't matter. I'm also going to make this look like a picture frame. This doesn't matter either. I'm just doing this so that we can keep track of it and see what's happening. So I'm making this look like a picture frame. Why did I make it green? So the concept behind the clipping mask is, wouldn't it be nice if I could only see what was in the picture frame without having to edit and get rid of pixels in Photoshop? It's a non-destructive way of cropping an image. So there's 3 things that you need for a clipping frame relationship. You need the thing that you're clipping. You need the frame, think of it as like the cookie dough, and here's the cookie cutter. And then you need to invoke the clipping mask relationship. And it's so common that it's on the right mouse button in context sensitive mode. So I'm just going to select both entities. I'm going to right click and say make clipping mask. And you see what happens, similar to what happened in InDesign. As I hover, you can see the original size of it is still there, but there's also this, it's been clipped. And it's a relationship. I can change the parameters of this relationship by double clicking on it and going into something called isolation mode. And when I'm in this mode, I can change the shape of the clipping mask and reveal more or less of the photo. I can change the size of the photo. They're both entities, the frame and the photo, are completely editable. Maybe I wanted this rotated for some reason. And it's very useful because more often than not, the photo doesn't come in at the right size. You're not necessarily sure what you want to show. So with this, it's set up already to be useful in the way that we sort of need it to be useful. I'm going to double click outside of this to get rid of the relationship. Let's say you wanted to see that frame. It's still there. If I double click on it again, I can select the frame. By default, it turns invisible when you make a clipping mask, but I can go ahead and give it a line weight if for some reason I wanted that, right? But by default, it's invisible. So let's see how that relates to what happened in InDesign. That process happened automatically when I brought in this photo. Oh, let's look at one more thing about in Illustrator. Remember my frame was on a layer called frame and my photo was on a layer called photo? Well, one of the things that I actually don't like about clipping mask is that when you perform it, the separate entities don't maintain their layer definition, which is a fancy way of saying that they end up both going on the same layer. So that's something to be aware of when you're using the clipping mask. So when I go back to my InDesign document, even though I know I had my photo layer current when I brought in that photo, the same thing has happened. It's gone on the same layer as the grid because that's just sort of the default behavior of clipping mask. Now, those of you that know a little bit of Creative Cloud know it's nothing to change the layer back. I can just select the entity and just drag it to the layer I want it to be on, drag it onto the photo layer, and then it responds as normal. What if I want to change what's displayed, which I want to do all the time in a clipping mask? Well, I can select it and double click on it, and much like in the clipping mask, I can see the limits of the actual photo. And with this, I can resize it. I'm holding down Shift, of course, to maintain the aspect ratio. And also, in this case, I'm holding down Alt so that it rescales around the center of the picture instead of one of the corners. So in this way, you can get exactly the cropping that you want, at least the cropping that the photo you took allows. I'm going to go and drop in a couple of more images and see how this might look as a page. I'm going to use the same method, the clipping mask. If I double click on this, I'm not seeing the limits, but that's because it's so huge that I have to go back out to sort of get there. Be confident that what you're doing is working. If something is supposed to have happened, think of why maybe you're not seeing it. So in this case, it's a very common thing for the resolution of the photo to be different from that of the file. And so I'm using my arrow keys to center this. And it's a way of getting perfectly sized photos. And this is how you can populate your, double click on it. I'm zooming out. Now, I'm being a little sloppy in that if I was doing this for real, and this is something to be aware of, I might go ahead and open these images in Photoshop and resize them so that they're in the ballpark for what I'm using them for. And this is easy enough to fix. This is not a problem. But I don't want this PDF to be 50 meg. I need to keep things under sort of, I need to keep things reasonably sized. And you would probably want to, as you're putting together your portfolio, open up each image that you're planning on using and make sure that it's not going to blow the size out of the water. You can't be sending people 50 meg PDFs. That's basically broadcasting the fact that you don't know what you're doing when it comes to putting together a document like this. The P in PDF stands for portable, so the file size should be reasonable. So you sort of get the idea about what's going on here. I'm just going to Control Z to undo these. And what if I had a definite idea for a project here? let's say I wanted to, this was going to be a chapter. I know what I want to do here. The first thing I might want to do is turn on that chapter heading and see how that's going to work out for me. So I'm planning 3 pictures. I'm going to talk about how I worked through this project. Don't need that one, delete. Don't need that one, delete. I can either apply a different master, the chapter heading master, to this page, or I could just hit delete. And I want a chapter title. I want to say something about what the project is. And then I'm going to show 3 examples of how the project evolved, let's say. Very typical sort of planning-ish type of thing to do, right? I'm zooming out sort of extreme to be able to resize these photos. So let's say it started with a charrette of some sort, and then we did some concept planning. Again, I have to zoom out. I didn't do my homework before I started doing this video. I should have resized my images. But better that you see some strangeness and how to deal with it. I always hate demos where everything works perfectly, and then you start doing your work and it doesn't work out so perfectly. So you're seeing how it actually happens. And then maybe finished product. So here's a narrative about my Oak Street townhome infill project. All right, and I would type in obviously all the erudite things that you want to say. This text is grayed out so that it doesn't drive you crazy, and this text is purple so you can see it. What you're going to want to do is probably, I recommend, making all the text black. So I selected all the text, and down here in the color panel, I'm going to select the type indicator, and I'm just going to make everything black, which is what it sort of wants to be. And it's not letting me do that. Why not? There it is. Okay, wonder what this looks like. If you want to preview a spread, the command is Shift-W, and you get to see it in preview mode. Not bad for a drag and drop operation. Pretty respectable, actually. And that's it. That's what this is about. I'm going to Control Z and just undo this in a sort of clumsy manner while you get bored. So flexibility in pages. Delete stuff. It's easier than designing it. Everything's been sort of laid out to work. Well, what if you find these sizes a little constricting? That's okay. The grid is actually quite flexible. You might want to, instead of using sorry, I'm trying to think what nothing's happening. You might want to use 2 of those and have 1 picture on a page instead of the way I've got it laid out. And that's a nice way of, that's how the grid works. You can vary it, right? Maybe I'll have, instead of 4 on this page, I'll have 1 image and 1 paragraph. So there's a lot of flexibility in this grid. It's a strange, it seems like a joke, but the constraint equals the freedom. Another thing you could do is maybe go horizontal. You can go across the fold, and maybe you'll have something that is, say you're doing a corridor study or something more horizontal in shape. Absolutely, you can work across the fold. And the cool thing about how these clipping masks work is that they're automatic. When you see when I'm stretching these borders, ordinarily that would warp the photo, but in this case it doesn't. It's the clipping mask, and it behaves how it's supposed to. Or maybe you need, maybe it's your feature photo. You can take up the whole, you know, the whole photo area. So a lot of potential flexibility from the grid, and a very basic grid. So you may find after watching this video and after playing with this file, maybe you're inspired to set up your own grid and do something that's even more flexible still. Absolutely, why not? I mean, it is kind of fun. It's what passes for fun in our field, if you can believe that. But otherwise, this template is there for you to use and drag and drop, and it's a little easier to just work with it and sort of play with it. Don't forget, Control Z is your best friend. You can always just undo something that you don't like. But save a clean copy before you go doing anything. And if you have any questions, you can always contact me on this. I'm going to end the video here. And if there's anything that I've forgotten about as I get another cup of tea, I'll come back and add it. Otherwise, good luck, and I'd like to see your portfolios when they're done. Actually, there were a couple of things that I forgot to tell you. Many things that could be talked about on this, but there's a limit. Two things I did want to touch on, though. On the cover, I did a built-in sort of quick graphic thing that you might find useful or might not. So instead of dropping this into one of the rectangle frames, I'm just going to drag it in there. I want this to take up the entire cover from margin to margin. By the way, our margins are 1/2 inch on top, bottom, and inside, and 1 inch on the outsides. So asymmetrical margins, something Gutenberg would have approved of. And now you can sort of see what's happening here with this white gradient fade. So I'm going to go ahead and try and get a little bit of a view in here, and just something that suggests, you know, work. And using the automatic clipping mask, it's easy to just get this right on the money with the margins. It snaps to the margin. So there's my picture. If I turn on this white gradient fade that I've added, I've got a sort of quick and dirty cover concept. You can obviously spend a lot of time on the cover. It should be either a great image. In this case, this is something you might say it's just sort of suggestive. Anyway, if you find it useful, it's there, and you can use it. And let's see what it looks like. If we Shift W, there it is. It's something that's on the cover that took no time to do, and it's finished. The second thing I wanted to show you is in Pages. If you need to delete or add pages, this is where you would do it. You can do it from the pull down too, but it's easiest to do it here. Take care when you're doing this. For a PDF, you probably want to do it in pairs. And if you're thinking that this is going to go to print, you need to do it in 4s. You need to do it in pairs of spreads, 4 pages at a time. Anyway, if I needed to delete pages, I would just select them and either hit the garbage can or drag them into the garbage can. Control Z to undo that. If you needed to add pages, and 12 is a lot of pages, so think about that. But the quickest way to do it is you could right click and duplicate the spread. But here's a trick. When you do that, it adds them to the end, and look what happens to our back page. We don't want that to happen. I'm going to Control Z to undo that. You don't actually want them added to the end. You typically want to add them to the middle somewhere. So you can do that right here as well. You know that the Creative Cloud shortcut key for copy is Alt. So I'm just going to select these two and hold down Alt, and that's a way you can copy pages without, it didn't work. Why didn't it work? Select these two, Start dragging, hold down Alt. There you go. You need to see that line. Okay, now it worked. It didn't upset our last cover, our final page. So that's a shortcut. Instead, it'll save you some time when you're trying to add or subtract pages. Okay, that's over a half hour for me, so that's plenty for right now. If you want to enhance your fundamental skills on this, obviously the place to go is to LinkedIn Learning, formerly lynda.com, and check out some of the libraries there. Really good tutorials. The Essential Learning, I think, is the basics library. Really good videos. On this YouTube channel, I also have another InDesign video for booklets for my 458 class. You can check that out too. That talks about a little more about printing, and some of it's duplicated, but some of it's new material. So feel free to check that out too. Good luck, and I do want to see your portfolio when it's done.